Welcome to EDUCAUSE's Transforming Leadership webinar series, Navigating Risk, Accessibility, and Strategic Insights. My name is Jason Martin. I'm an online event production manager at EDUCAUSE, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. This webinar is part 2 of a 4-part series brought to you by Vantage Technology Consulting Group, an EDUCAUSE strategic partner. EDUCAUSE is working closely with Vantage this year to strengthen the collaboration between private industry and higher education institutions and to evolve the higher education technology market. Please be on the lookout for other content from and connection opportunities with Vantage throughout the year. We're pleased to welcome today's panelists. They'll introduce themselves in just a moment, but I want to give you a brief orientation on our session's learning environment. If you are using social media, please use the tag #EDUCAUSEwebinar. And we hope that you'll make this session interactive. To do so, please open the chat by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom of the presentation window. You can use the chat throughout the presentation to make comments, share resources, and to pose questions for our panelists. When you do so, please be sure to select everyone from the chat dropdown so that you can engage with all participants. We will hold a Q&A during the end of the presentation, but we encourage you to type your questions into the chat throughout the webinar. If you look down at the bottom of your screen as well, you'll notice that there's a poll launched. We encourage you as you're entering the room or still with us to complete the poll by opening that button. There are 5 questions, so if you scroll all the way down, you'll see all 5 questions there. If during the hour you have any technical issues, please send a private message by selecting panelists in the chat dropdown. And as always, the session recording and slides will be archived later today on the EDUCAUSE website. With that, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand things over to you, Shannon and Cynthia.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you all for being here. It's exciting to see people joining from all over the country. So I'm going to do just a little bit of a content intro, provide some foundational information, then we'll get into our panelist introductions and our conversation. If you haven't completed that poll that Jason was mentioning, please do. We're really interested in learning who is in the room with us today. So the federal government recently clarified regulations that have caused many colleges and universities to reprioritize digital accessibility. Most higher education institutions in the US must ensure that all digital content is accessible to people with disabilities, and this includes websites, mobile apps, digital documents, and multimedia. Non-compliance can lead to lawsuits, to expensive settlements, bad press, and to reputational harm. And some institutions, in fact, have already been impacted by legal actions over inaccessible websites, course materials, and software. But beyond these legal considerations, providing an accessible technology environment for everyone is the right thing to do. It ensures that students, faculty, staff, and community members, including those with disabilities, can fully participate in the academic, research, and service activities that are central to an institution's mission. In today's conversation, we'll talk briefly about some of those upcoming requirements, but we'll center most of our conversation and our panel discussion with our experts today around lessons learned and actions that you can take to improve digital accessibility at your institution and to build a campus culture where accessibility for all is a priority. So again, we'll spend roughly the first 30 to 45 minutes in the panel discussion, and we've reserved the final 15 minutes of the Q&A of the session for Q&A with participants. So we really want your questions. As Jason mentioned, please do share those in the chat throughout the presentation. We'll capture those. If we can respond to them in real time or in our conversation, we will. Otherwise, we'll save them for the Q&A portion. Okay, so again, another reminder, please respond to the poll if you haven't, and I'll hand it over to Cynthia.
Thank you, Shannon, and welcome everybody. We're so happy to see all of you and looking forward to today's conversation. So to that end, let's do some introductions. I'm going to ask our experts to provide their name and their title and institution, pronouns if you want to, and tell us what's one thing you do for fun. It's nice to get to know people a little bit in these kinds of sessions. So Gwen, let's start with you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gwen Bostic. I'm the Accessibility Compliance Specialist Senior at Western Michigan University. My pronouns are she and her. And the one thing that I like to do for fun is shop at antique stores and see how items can be repurposed.
Thanks, Gwen. Kyle.
Sure. Thanks, Cynthia. Hi, my name's Kyle Shackman. I'm the Senior Director of Digital Accessibility Services at Harvard University. I use he pronouns. And I'm also the co-chair of the EDUCAUSE IT Accessibility Group. For fun, I really like soccer, whether that's like watching a game on the weekends, attending, or helping support, little kids' youth soccer all the way up to professionals.
Well, thank you, Kyle. And let me ask my colleague Shannon to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Dunn. I'm the Director of Strategic Team Operations here at Vantage. I've been with Vantage for about 3.5 years. I came to Vantage from the University of Florida. I still live in Florida, where I led instructional design and educational technology services. And that team really did a lot to teach me about digital accessibility, and we expanded a lot of our services and I think the maturity of the institution. And I'm really proud of the work that I did and the team did when I was there. One of the things that I do for fun is I recently found live music again, and I'm going to go to a music festival this weekend. I'm not sure if I'm going to like that, so we'll see. But live music is something I've been enjoying recently.
Thanks, Shannon. And I will introduce myself. My name is Cynthia Golden. I am also with Vantage Technology Consulting Group. I'm an executive consultant there, and I was most recently associate provost at the University of Pittsburgh. And in that role, some of my wonderful colleagues did some great work in the accessibility space, particularly focused on teaching and learning, but not completely. So we are happy to have you here. And Jason, are we ready to take a look at the poll results?
Yeah, we had a great amount of responses. So here are the results. I'll share them out.
Terrific. Okay, so the first question was, what is your primary role or job responsibility? And it looks like the largest group is in the IT professional space with a non-accessibility focus. We also have accessibility specialists here, about 14%, and instructional designers and academic technologists, equally 14%, and smaller groups of CIOs and faculty members. So that's the first question. Let's see. Oops, I think I just closed my poll, Jason. Can you open it again?
Oh, 1 second. There we go. I'll share. I'll reshare. There you are.
Okay. So this is the primary responsibility. Next question, please.
I can see all of them at once, Cynthia. Can you scroll down?
I can't. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that, folks.
No
Yes,
problem.
they are there. I was thinking they were screen by screen. So let's go to the second question, which is how would
So it's what
what
type of
what type of
institution?
institution do
Yeah,
you
there you go.
represent? And our largest group are four-year publics at 46%, followed by four-year privates at 29%. So it's interesting to see where everybody's coming from. Some online-only institutions, about 7%, and about 7% community colleges. So the third question, how would you describe your institution's current approach to digital accessibility? And I was really anxious to see this one. 21% say we're just starting to focus on accessibility, and 25% say they're in the early planning stages. We've got 32% actively implementing digital accessibility practices, and a number, 14% saying that they have a mature program with ongoing improvements, and a smaller group, 7%, saying they're not sure. The fourth question, what prompted your interest in this webinar? We always like to understand that. It looks like a third of you are preparing for upcoming accessibility regulations. Some of you, 15%, have a concern about the legal risks involved. Also, 15% want to improve equity and inclusion at your institution. A larger group a quarter, 26% are looking for resources to support accessibility, and 15% have a personal interest in accessibility, personal or professional. And the last question that we had on this little poll is, how familiar are you with the federal digital accessibility requirements and guidelines? 20% say you're very familiar, but 40% just say you're somewhat familiar, and 36% not very familiar. So still in that learning category, and 4% not familiar at all. So this is kind of, I will say this is what I expected to see roughly in these kinds of, in the responses to these questions. So let me turn it over to Shannon, who will start our discussions with our panelists and go from there.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. Thanks everyone for sharing a little bit about what your experience, knowledge is, and why you're here today. We're hoping to really bring a lot into that conversation. And it seems like quite a few people are here to learn, and thank you for embracing that opportunity. So I just want to remind everybody, please do share questions in the chat. At 45 minutes after the hour, we are going to stop our planned conversation, and we're going to try to answer a lot of your questions. We've got to have your questions to do that. And the first question that I've got for the panelists is, have you encountered any common misconceptions about digital accessibility that you think unnecessarily hinder progress toward accessibility? And if so, what did you do to address them and to resolve that kind of underlying misconception? And I'll go to Gwen first.
Okay. The one misconception that I've heard a lot is I would do it, but I don't know where to start, and there's no one to help me make my content accessible. And so when I hear that, it's like, okay, we've put out a lot of announcements, we've given a lot of workshops, but some other things that we've done to resolve that is really we've gone in, we've added our contact information to the accommodate letter in our Disability Services for Students office. They sent out a letter to instructors that tells them you will have a student in your course that needs accommodations. And so we make sure that our contact information, when I say our, the accessibility compliance specialist contact information is on that letter so that they can contact us if they need assistance. We put articles in our quarterly newsletter stating how the small things that can be done to make content more accessible. We make sure that we're part of new faculty orientation. So when new faculty come on campus, they have a face to put with the name. They have a contact to assist them, resolve some of their course maybe shortcomings in the accessibility area. We work collaboratively with our DSS and Institutional Equity Department. So we can help address some of those misconceptions that there's no one out there, because DSS and Institutional Equity may have contact with others that myself and my team member that we won't sit in those meetings, so we wouldn't have that contact. Again, we provide workshops. Sometimes we get referrals from our help desk, our IT help desk. And so that's how we really contact students, so that students know that we're available to help them also if they're having problems in a class. And we work with instructional designers too, because the instructional designers assist the instructors with their content, with the learning management system. So we work with them to make sure that accessibility is also thought of in the design process for the courses.
I love that, Gwen. I have two, and the first one builds off of what you just said. I think one of the biggest misconceptions I hear is, why are we doing this? Who are we building it for? Is anybody going to use this? Does anybody need something to be accessible? And we just know there is and there are, right? Like statistically, between 10 and 15% of students on our campuses nationwide are registered to receive accommodations. And we know based on decades of student responses that the biggest problem is that students don't report and don't sign up for accommodations. So that's probably a way underrepresentation. And then we think about Statistically in our population, right? Roughly a quarter of people have some identified disability, and that percentage only goes up once you get above 24 years old, right? So eventually, everybody joining us today is going to acquire some sort of disability, or they're going to not be with us anymore, right? And so it's just a matter of when. And so we're kind of building to make sure everybody can participate. And it's not just so people can like consume our content or be a learner, right? We probably face trouble with like hiring staff or retention or other things, right? We don't just want people to consume what we do. We want our communities to benefit from contributions of people with disabilities, right? If we're screening out a quarter or more of the population, we're missing on the contributions of learners, researchers, employees. And so we want to make sure we're building that from the start because it's so much easier and cheaper to do from the beginning. And then the second big misconception I hear is that uh, accessibility is in opposition to innovation, right? We can't work on accessibility because it's going to hinder being innovative, being adaptive. And I would argue that the opposite is true, right? Thinking about some of the most ambitious projects I've worked on at my university have accessibility built in from the start, right? And it's a core tenet from when we're going to start. And there's some really big complex projects we're working on right now where accessibility has been embedded from day one. And sometimes we might find an error, and we've got to work on fixing it, right? But like accessibility and innovation can go hand in hand as long as we're thinking about it and being intentional about it. It doesn't work when we get to, you know, a week before release and say, oh yeah, what about accessibility, right? That's not going to work. So as long as we're thinking about it and being intentional, we can do that, and that's going to enable us to get more participation from everybody.
Yeah, and to add on to what Kyle just said, the accessibility community is one that any one of us can be part of at any time. It just takes one accident, one health concern. And so we have to think about that. And if we make, like Kyle said, if we make our products accessible from the beginning, it's helpful for everyone, no matter what.
Yeah, and I love that. I think you both hit on accessibility is for individuals, but it's also really for the community. And I think that's a really strong message. So our next question is, what are the key legal and regulatory requirements that organizations should be aware of, including some of those timelines that we know are out there? And what are your institutions doing to prepare? We know that your institutions are pretty different, so I think it'll be interesting to hear maybe some different approaches. Kyle, why don't you go first?
Sure. I'll mention two things. First, what everyone has probably heard about most recently is the regulations that were updated within the past year about digital accessibility specifically. So there were two sets of regulations, one through the Department of Justice, one through the Department of Health and Human Services. They both came out within a month of each other in early 2024. And what both sets of those regulations said is that technologies on our campuses need to meet the Web Content Accessibility Guideline 2.1 AA standards, which is, I know, a mouthful, but it's like the most widely accepted international standard for accessibility. And so, especially for the Department of Justice one, it says every public institution, actually, it says every state and local government entity, higher education institutions are state and local government entities. So that's why they're a part of this. Need to comply with these WCAG 2.1 AA standards. And it's coming up. It's going to be here before we know it. The compliance deadline is April of 2025. And then for some smaller state and local government entities, not smaller institutions, the deadline will be 2027. So it'll be here before we know it in terms of that. And I should mention, Shannon, you mentioned in the introduction, right? Like we might have heard of this more recently because of these regulations. It's great that it's really clearly spelled out. But this is building on 15 or 20 years of investigations and court cases, kind of all leading in this direction, right? So while the regulation itself is new, it goes back to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a law codified in 1990, saying we've got to make sure we're not treating people with disabilities differently. That's 35 years old. And the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, right? So that's 52, 53 years old, saying any entity receiving federal funds has to make sure they're treating folks with disabilities the same as folks without disabilities, right? So these regulations are new in that they're saying in order to comply with those, we need to meet these specific technical requirements, but it's building on decades of understanding and legal compliance.
Thank you, Kyle. Let's go to you next, Gwen.
Yeah, just to add on to what Kyle said, we're looking at the ADA. We're also looking at the European Accessibility Act because we do have some courses that are taught overseas. So we're looking to make sure that's those meet those standards. And I know that's June of 2025 when the European Act is going into effect. So that's coming very, very quickly. What we're doing to prepare ourselves here at Western, as we're working closely with our ADA coordinator, just to be aware of the changes in the law and what we need to do to come up to speed. We're working with our university legal counsel to make sure that they provide us with case studies to see what's going on in the court system. We're reviewing our website to make sure it's compliant. We're also reviewing our mobile app that we use with our LMS because a lot of our students use that mobile app. So we make sure that that is accessible also.
I'll give a quick +1 to what Gwen said about the European Accessibility Act. If you haven't been familiar, right, we deal with this a lot in our regulatory spaces. Think of like GDPR and privacy, right? Like where sometimes things outside the US will influence what our, even in American higher education institutions do. But if your institution has online courses like Gwen mentioned, or a publisher or academic publisher that's selling or licensing materials all around the world, other cases can apply, right? But think about those common things that many institutions might have that are going to be squarely in the target area related to commerce and those European regulations as well.
So, and I think if any of our viewers or listeners want to learn more specifics about the regulatory issues, there are a lot of resources out there, particularly some good ones on the EDUCAUSE website too. Is there any place else you'd suggest, Kyle or Gwen?
I'll post it a lot, or I'll probably say this a few times today, but our EDUCAUSE accessibility community group is a great resource. It's higher ed practitioners, and they're dealing with these exact challenges across their institution. So that's a great place where a lot of resources get funneled that are useful to practitioners.
Great. So moving on to our next question, we wanted to talk a little bit about institutions that have limited resources. And I think we all know that there are some institutions that have more than others. And we are also living in a time of a good bit of uncertainty with budgets and things like that. So the question that we wanted to talk about was really for institutions that have limited resources, how can they prepare for compliance requirements and make some progress towards compliance? And Gwen, I think we were going to start with you.
Okay. I think what you can do is pull in your colleagues that are on campus with you to help um, prepare you for these compliance requirements. Review what other colleges are doing. See if you can incorporate some of those things that they're doing into your process. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. If somebody has already gone through the process and it works, try to pull it into yours. Um, and then provide your campus with just a baseline foundational knowledge of what accessibility means. Everyone needs to know something. So if you could just provide a baseline for your community, I think that would really assist with making the requirements. And just to piggyback off what Kyle said, the EDUCAUSE IT accessibility community, if you're not part of that group, become part of that group because they provide a lot of resources and it really has helped me in my position here at Western.
Any thoughts, Kyle?
Yeah, definitely +1, the institutional collaborations. And so EDUCAUSE is a great avenue for that. Also, there are a lot of smaller institutional collaborations. Maybe it's through your like athletic conference, or I'm a part of the like Ivy League. And so a lot of the Ivy institutions will get together and coordinate because we're all doing the same thing, right? And so we can learn from each other, we can collaborate. In fact, the Ivy institutions just held a cross-institutional event last week about promoting accessibility across our campuses. And we had experts from across our institutions kind of speaking about different efforts they're doing and undertaking, right? So sometimes, whether it's your local regional area or like-minded institutions or a really big organization such as EDUCAUSE, right? Finding others that are working in this space and borrowing strategies and tips is really useful. Another thing I think is leveraging internal to the institution processes and workflows and opportunities to collaborate. So, one of the things in my organization we do is within IT, we have combined services under one umbrella for information security, data privacy, and digital accessibility. And so, those are all compliancy oriented kind of things. They're a little bit different in scope or what we're working towards, but we need to think about those things, whether it's something we're building, something we're buying. In every single person at our institution is a vector for doing that really well or for opening up to potential liability in some way or another, right? So there's training and awareness components, there's compliance components. So finding those avenues at your institution that already exist and saying, oh, well, we're not doing accessibility the way we could or should, but there's a process that exists that we can plug into, right? That's not going to solve everything, but sometimes that's a way to accelerate adoption, and it doesn't take a lot of new resources um, wrapped around a process in that way. I will
Mhm.
say though, just like anything, you wouldn't say, "Oh, we're taking like security really seriously," but like, we don't have anybody dedicated to it, right? There's no expert that we have. So at the end of the day, there is still a need for someone, whether it's a part of a hat they wear or their sole role, with expertise in this area. It's a discipline, just like many of our roles in IT. And having some dedicated effort and expertise is going to be really valuable. But there are a lot of opportunities to leverage that expertise in existing workflows and processes.
I think that this is all great advice, and I think it applies whether or not you are an under-resourced or very well-resourced institution, frankly. Um, so, what do you think some of the things are that institutions should do to evaluate their current compliance in terms of the upcoming requirements? So in other words, what should people do to get a baseline about where they are? And I think, Kyle, we were going to start with you.
Sure. Well, we mentioned earlier, peer benchmarking is great, right? If you're earlier on in this journey, I bet there are institutions that your college or university benchmarks about all sorts of things related to admissions or communication or hosting events or whatever the case might be. We peer benchmark all the time in what we do, and the same can be done in this accessibility realm. There are some exemplar institutions that are out there doing amazing work, communicating about what they're doing. I'm certainly proud of the work my institution's doing in the digital accessibility space. And borrowing and sharing ideas. We work in a really open, welcoming community. So learning from others of what works and what doesn't is going to be key. And then there's going to be some level of assessment of where are we, right? We got to build a roadmap and say, what do we know we need to work on? If today is the first day you are learning about or working on accessibility, like you're just not going to have everything done in a year, right? This can take a while, but that doesn't mean it's not worth starting. Many institutions that have policies are forward looking and say, okay, we're going to choose a date based on when we think we can launch. And we're in May 2025. So maybe it'll say, all right, June 1st of 2025, we're going to go live and everything new needs to meet A, B, and C benchmarks and be accessible from the start, right? So It's like the environmental movement. Like the best time to plant a tree was like 20 years ago. The next best time is today, right? So start today and do something about accessibility at your school, which is going to be helpful and build for the long term. And then we've got to work on the policy levers at our institutions. We probably have policies and procedures about financial responsibility and reporting and all sorts of other areas. So having kind of a institution-wide set of expectations of what's required, we have a digital accessibility policy at our school, is going to help. It's not going to solve everything overnight, but it's going to help set institution-wide expectations for what happens and why it's important. And the nuts and bolts involved in getting to that point can also go a long way to enacting accessibility, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. But how about you, Gwen?
Oh, yeah, I agree with you about having that web policy to follow. That gets everyone on board in your campus community so everyone knows where the community stands. I'm also part of our product review process, and it's very important that you review the digital products that come on your campus. If you're just letting products in that are not compliant, then you won't be able to meet these standards in time. So you need to have a product review process. And also, if you have products that have gone through your process and they are accessible, keep a list that's available to others on campus because a lot of times we are duplicating services, duplicating products. And instead of doing that, just have something.
I think Gwen froze.
I think so as well.
Yeah.
Oh, now you're back. You froze for a second there, Gwen, but
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Zoom
Well,
just
I
couldn't
think
handle all the good stuff you were saying. That's all right.
absolutely.
Oh,
We've overloaded Zoom with good stuff.
oh yeah. I was just talking about the product review,
Yeah.
just reviewing the products that you bring on campus. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super important. And I think, we've talked about some of the technology accessibility, and you've both really touched on some of what I think are really behaviors and ways that we can start to try to bring people along in understanding the value of accessibility and digital accessibility and inclusive practice. So one of the things that I want to ask you, and you've both touched on this, but how do you kind of go out and intentionally engage people across roles, across different units of the institution in accessibility efforts? Where have you been successful? Where have you maybe had some lessons learned about what's not been as effective? And Gwen, let's go to you first.
Well, engaging people on campus, we really show them how they fit into the accessibility landscape. And we show them how they can contribute. People want to share their work. They want to enhance their teaching. They want to expand their level of influence. So we just show them how do you fit in here. I think our most successful area has been with our math department, and in our math, we worked with um, a student who was blind on campus, and they just saw ways where they could update their material. Um, Working with this student gave them a view that they did not have because that student was coming from a whole different perspective. Um, and once they updated their material, those instructors became accessibility champions. So they were able to influence the other instructors in that department. Um, some of the lessons learned just have been just to give people a base, um, show how accessibility intersects with something that they are passionate about, and then in doing that, that will help them to influence others.
Yeah, I love that, Gwen. We talked earlier, right, about how we want the participation of everybody. The tagline of our policy rollout effort at our institution is we all have a role to play. Whatever our role is, we all
Mhm.
have a role to play in the accessibility work that happens on campus, whether you're senior most executive or you're a frontline employee or anywhere in between. There's something that you can do for accessibility. And so we, as a team, my team that focuses on this digital accessibility, we try to engage all levels of the institution and all roles. So training is a huge one of what we offer and make available. But We engage our leaders in some committees and higher level work. We have designated liaisons that we help coordinate efforts with around campus, right? Especially to a large decentralized research university. We have volunteer roles where people can volunteer and say, I want to learn more about accessibility on my team and flag issues, right? And a lot of the biggest efforts, to Gwen's point about areas doing really well, come from just authentic representation, right? It comes from having a staff member who might be blind and they want to contribute and be a member of what's happening. I'm thinking in one of our schools, we had a staff member with a disability that worked in HR. And so there was a lot of attention given to like the HR system, shocking, that so that they could fully participate and do their job. We had one of our big, well-known research institutes that did a ton of work on accessibility because they got a renowned researcher who just happened to be blind. They became really interested in making sure that all of their stuff was accessible because they didn't want to lose the insights of that researcher, right? They were there for a reason, they were contributing. And so what we're trying to do is give a baseline awareness to everybody so that those moments aren't the only catalyst for improvement in accessibility, right? Just like the laws require, that we're thinking about that ahead of time so it doesn't become a barrier to participation before someone starts. Maybe you've got a little touch-up work to do, but it's like, oh yeah, we did a pretty good job and we might have to smooth the edges out to make sure someone can participate fully. But giving opportunities, whether they're a senior leader, an individual contributor, and making tools and services available so they can make things accessible as easily as they can in their day-to-day jobs.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you both hit on this idea that Cynthia also posted in the chat, that we all have a role to play in helping people understand that this is a community-driven impact that we all want to have, and it relies on our individual actions and behaviors. I think that's really great. You all talked about reaching out to people across the institution, kind of across roles, but I'm also really curious about what role you think institutional leaders in particular should be playing in fostering a culture of accessibility, kind of beyond meeting just compliance requirements. And we'll go to Kyle first.
Sure. As I mentioned, all the way up and down the org chart, right, there are roles to do for accessibility. And one of the things we do several, right? I mentioned we have policies that have requirements about accessibility, which is key, right? But you don't just go to someone you've never met and say, hey, let's adopt a policy on accessibility. And it can take a lot of work to understand why. So we have a university accessibility committee, which is senior leaders from across the organization, vice presidents, provosts, deans, that we meet with on a quarterly basis to discuss issues related to accessibility. That includes things like student accommodations, it includes facilities accessibility, and IT accessibility, right? And so they may not be the world's greatest experts, but you know what? They know about accessibility and they know why it's important. And when a new person takes one of those roles, they have some positive peer pressure to join that group and come to it because all of their other peers at that level of the organization do it, expect it. And so when asks come along that are related to accessibility, say adopting a policy or working through a compliance issue, it's not the first time they've heard about accessibility, right? There's some baseline understanding of why we're doing it, why we're allocating budget. You know, I work on a campus that's been around for, approaching 400 years. Some of those like 18th century buildings were not built with accessibility in mind, right? So there are always issues that we face in terms of thinking about accessibility and how we can both start from accessibility when we're doing something new, but also incorporating barrier removals into existing efforts that we have, right? And ensuring there's that senior level awareness is really key to making sure that that can be an ongoing effort.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. Gwen, what would you add?
Yeah, I like what Kyle said about positive peer pressure. So leaders need to be champions of accessibility in their areas. And they need to enforce accountability. If someone is not meeting those our needs of being accessible, then they need to be held accountable for that. And leaders also need to provide the resources that we need. It's good to talk about it, but we need money behind it. We need people behind it. We need the resources. So leaders need to lead by example.
I love that, Gwen. Nothing is more uh, aspiring of work and effort when we have some of those tools that provide data about captioning or accessibility issues on websites or courses, and you can like stratify it by different divisions or schools, and oh, look which one is reducing their bug count by more and more, and suddenly others will find that little bit extra effort to get there. I love that as an example.
Yeah.
I don't think the role of leaders can be any more important in anything that, I mean, I think it's critical in this space. So thank you both for those questions. Gwen, earlier you talked a little bit, you just mentioned a little bit about training. And so we wanted to just spend a minute and talk about your institutions, Kyle and Gwen. Do you host or facilitate formal training, and for whom? And is it mandatory, and who owns it? So I think let's start with you, Gwen.
Okay. Yes, we do have some formal training. We use one of our vendors, Site Improve. We use Site Improve to review our website, uh, do automated testing on our website. So we use them for like virtual and self-paced training. We can't make it mandatory, but when we have a captive audience like I said, our new faculty orientation or our TAGA orientation, we provide accessibility training during that time. Um, Sometimes what we're trying to look at how we can tie maybe accessibility training into like tenure. So, there are a lot of objectives for instructors to meet tenure. And so we're trying to see if accessibility can be tied in with that. We're just trying to get something to loop others, the bigger the audience to bring into our trainings. That's what we're
Mhm.
looking at.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that. We think about training on several different levels, right? One of the biggest barriers to working on accessibility is just that someone may not be aware of either that accessibility is an issue or what to do. So we try to require that one most broadly in terms of, hey, accessibility is an issue. These are how it manifests. If you're doing one of these kind of activities or roles, this is what you need to make sure you know and where to get help and support, right? And we probably, all of us at meetings like today, probably get training like that at our institutions across a whole range of things, right? Being bystanders for like gender-based harassment, right? If you have any kind of financial responsibilities, you probably have some high-level training on institutional policies or requirements in that area. Most of us probably around security or privacy of what we do. And so we try to think of accessibility in a similar lens to that of it's another aspect everybody needs to know a little bit about, and then we offer role-based training depending on what roles you have. And so if you have access to our web platform where you can create or update content on a website, you need to attend our what we call our content creators training, right? Our IT department has a foundational training called the Harvard IT Academy that has training on a whole lot of different dimensions, including like providing good customer service, right? Like real basic tenets, but that are important to being a good service delivery organization. And then there are three subject area requirements in kind of the foundational levels of IT staffdom. And one of those is accessibility. So you learn a little bit about security, you learn a little bit about user experience. You also learn about accessibility, that it's a core requirement, and you take a little training related to it. So we focus on the roles that people have and matching training to them. We have lots about making accessible documents or presentations or using the tools that are available in our learning management system. And so depending on what role you have, we try to make sure everyone has that base level of awareness that accessibility is a thing, you need to know about it and know how to get help. And then depending on what your role is, a little more targeted specifics about your day-to-day work.
So thank you. I think these are all great ideas and great practices that other institutions may really be interested in implementing too. We have a question about vendors. And it looks like, I'm just quickly glancing at some of the questions coming in. A lot of the questions coming in are related to the vendor space. So I'll jump in with the first one, then we can get to the audience questions. On a high level, one of the things we wanted to mention was, or talk about, was how do we get vendors engaged to deliver accessible products if they don't already? And Kyle, if you want to make a few questions on that, and then Gwen, and then we'll jump right into the audience questions. I mean, make a few comments, so we'll jump into the audience questions.
Totally. I do have plenty of questions though in the area. I I think working with vendors is a huge and monumental challenge that we face and an opportunity. It's both. Um, I'm still frustrated and my team is frustrated by the number of times we work with a vendor and the answer is like, oh, no one's really asked us about that in accessibility. And honestly, we just know that not to always be the case sometimes, or to not get a great answer on thinking about accessibility. Well, for all of us in higher ed, these regulations we were talking about earlier are a great there's no more excuses, right? It's like very clearly spelled out. It's been publicly available and posted for a year, and we knew that was coming for at least a year before that, right? And so for this like 15-20 year period, it's been, we got to make sure that we don't treat people with disabilities differently. And then the answer was how? How do we know? And so that was fought out in so many court cases and legal rulings and adjudications. And now it's really clear. These regulations say we need to follow these WCAG 2.1 AA technical standards, and that's what we need to work towards. So hopefully we have opportunities to work with our vendor partners and say, we need you to do this. And it's not just Harvard or Western Michigan that are going to be asking you for this. It should be all of our institutions working toward it. But it can be tough sometimes when there are only a couple of big players in a particular space, right? But we as a collective hopefully can really work to move some markets in this direction, because it's going to make it easier and more cost efficient. If every institution is spending person hours and expertise in doing technical audits and deep dives, that is systemically really inefficient. But we are required to do so and to make sure our technology is accessible. Two tips I love to do when you're working with a vendor are, and this doesn't need to be a surprise question, tell them in advance, but when you're getting a demo of a product that you're looking to do, ask the vendor to demonstrate, maybe 2 or 3 key features that you're looking at with no mouse, so using only a keyboard, which is a key accessibility requirement, and ideally with a tool called a screen reader, which allows someone who's blind or low vision to access the tool. And hopefully there's someone at a vendor, especially if they're larger, that can do it, right? But those are 2 key requirements for accessibility. And I promise you do not need to be the world's greatest expert to watch a 5 to 7 minute demo and say, does that mostly work with no mouse, or does it fall down, right? Or can they kind of get through it with a screen reader or not? There is, I promise, our field has more technical documentation, but that is a really easy thing that you don't need to be a big expert. And if a vendor is going to sell in this space, they have an obligation to make sure they are helping us meet these legal requirements that we have. And so asking for simple things like, can you show me that it's meeting a few of these requirements, is a perfectly reasonable ask. It give them time to prepare and allow, and you can get that as a real quick pulse on, are they in a mostly good direction or are they not? And the last thing, apologies for going long, is the higher ed community has been working on some tools to help do this. So the HECVAT is an example. Gwen and I have both worked on that in recent years, along with many others from the EDUCAUSE accessibility group, to try to, again, integrate security, privacy, accessibility, AI, these other things, so that when we work with the vendor community, higher ed can kind of speak with the same voice or similar voices and say, these are expectations we have of vendor partners that are going to work and service the higher ed community. And we really want to work together to do it because there's a huge customer base out there. And if you're meeting those requirements that we are required to follow for technology that we build or buy, it's going to open a huge market.
Do you have anything to add, Gwen, before I pass this on to Shannon?
Just two short things to add to what Kyle said. We, as accessibility experts, need to assist others to do their research on companies, to find those companies who have available accessible products and purchase those products. And I know there are times where there's a product out there that's a requirement for that particular area, and it may not be accessible, but that's the time when you talk to your customer rep and see, okay, what's your roadmap for making this accessible? And I think if we all as a group, we've got to do this as a group, and I'm talking about higher ed, we've got to do this as a group and and talk to them about that. Like Kyle said, they have to make these products accessible for us. We are the customers. So I think that will help implement the change.
Thank you.
This is a really interesting component of this conversation, and we have a participant question that I think extends it. And the question is, are there any initiatives to create a common service to do accessibility product reviews, both evaluating the VPAT and the HECVAT documentation, as well as doing hands-on verification? Otherwise, every institution is repeating the same work. And I think that's a really interesting point, but I also don't know if there is any conversation of trying to pull together any resources to remove that duplicative effort.
I can go first.
Thanks, Kyle.
One of the things the HECVAT tries to do, excuse me, one of the things the HECVAT tries to do is it gives guidance to analysts at your school, right, to make all kinds of risk-based decisions about all of the different dimensions. And so it doesn't so much say this is good, this is bad, but it gives you the ability to select kind of by default core most important requirements and can nudge you in a right direction, right? It's meant to be kind of an information provider rather than a decision made on behalf of an institution. I mean, just like in the security space, there are vendors that will do the interpreting and work for a school, but those tools are primarily meant to make sure information is shared in a standardized way. And at least in the case of the HECVAT, it's kind of prioritized based on the input of initially hundreds of accessibility experts in higher ed.
Gwen, did you want to add anything before we move to the next question?
No, we can move on.
Okay.
Another question that came in, which I think many people might have this one, is what strategies do you use if there's a digital product that isn't fully compliant, but it's needed in a field and there's no other alternative?
What we usually do is create an equally effective alternative access plan. So we work with um, the department that wants to use the product, and we ask them, okay, how are you going to make it so that the student can get the information like their peers? What type of accommodations are you going to make so that they can get the same information? Because this product, it's one that uh, for that particular industry, and they need exposure to it. We know it's not accessible, but how are you going to make it so that that particular student can get that information, use the product, and become proficient?
I think Gwen's totally right, and that's like a really common practice in the industry of what we do. Something to note and to be aware of and to try to signal with vendors when we get that chance is those regulations we're all talking about say that process we've been using for a long time isn't sufficient.
Right.
And so I think we're all going to find out a little bit collectively what happens in those kinds of situations where where there's going to be a collision in terms of the process that many institutions have engaged in a while, and the regulations that say that it should be followed from the start without an exception like that many of us are probably familiar with. So
Yeah, and
not an answer, but that's a question, Cynthia.
Yeah.
I'll plug the community group too again, because I think there's a lot of really interesting questions and conversations about this topic in particular, and a lot of people sharing ideas and potential solutions that they've come up with. We only have a few minutes left, but I want to maybe work in at least one more question. One of the ones that we've got from participants today is, our LMS is Canvas, but our school does not require faculty to participate in any sort of training. Do any of your schools have the word accessibility in faculty contracts or in some other way to underscore how important it is? And I think there's an extension from that, and we can maybe talk about it not just for faculty, but for all of our employees. And we see something similar when we launch things like data governance, right? We give people responsibilities, but we don't actually acknowledge that we're asking people to do certain things or formalize that. So have you seen the formalization of this expectation and these requirements in any way?
We here we don't have accessibility in the contracts in the faculty contracts. Um, so we're trying to find other ways to encourage faculty to incorporate accessibility besides it just being the right thing to do, besides it being a universal practice that should be automatically thought of when you're developing your content and things like that. So
Yeah, we going beyond the contractual consideration, right? We try to make sure all the supports available to faculty support that. Our policy doesn't distinguish between public facing or learning management content, for example. I think it's really key, right? Sometimes there's a common faculty pushback around control of the classroom or various kinds of freedom. And what we're always really clear on is we're not at all limiting or suggesting what can be taught, what can be readings, what can be anything. We're just saying if you're going to offer it, make sure it's equally available to everybody, right?
Right.
So that might mean a slightly different file format or a different presentation type, right? But it's not a limit on what others can say. A couple of other tips that I found really helpful, especially for a larger institution, is it can sometimes be challenging or limiting to require something of faculty. I bet there are trainings that are easier to get through for teaching assistants, graduate assistants, other non-faculty folks that are probably also contributing a lot of content that goes in and actually learners are using. And so there are, your Center for Teaching and Learning or required trainings that your student teaching staff or postdocs or something might use are other great opportunities where you can make really similar gains faster.
So with less than 2 minutes left, there's one question that came in from a vendor. And the question says, as a vendor, what are things that we can do to help our clients, the schools, to meet these accessibility requirements? Any quick thoughts, Kyle and Gwen?
I'll
Go ahead, Kyle.
I'll say one thing to be super helpful is documenting how you do this, right? It's one thing to say, yeah, you can do it and work on accessibility. What configurations does the school need to deploy your tool and meet these requirements, right? How has it been tested? Those kinds of things are really helpful and save the school so much time and effort and money. And then we're all like high-fiving each other. Thanks, that was easy, rather than trying to try something 20 times to get what has already been figured out.
Yeah, I agree with Kyle on that. Also, keep your VPAT updated so that when we receive that, and there may be some areas where, as a vendor, you're falling short, but you do have a roadmap to let us know that okay, you're short in that area, but this is when we will have it updated and compliant, and that would be helpful to us.
Well, thank you all for a great conversation, and I will turn this back to Jason.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate the discussion and your wonderful questions. Before you leave, please take advantage of the survey that I've put into the chat. There's a link there, as well as a link to the registration page for today's event. That is where the archive recording will be posted later today. Also just want to take this opportunity to draw your attention to the next iteration in this series, which will be, there's 2 more parts. And the next session, I'm blanking on the date, but I think it will be in June. And so you all can register for that there. And other than that, thank you all so much. And thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate it. We'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.